Greetings, dear students. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
Hi, Stephanie.
And today, as promised last time, we're going to continue talking about our featured work of literature for this issue of our magazine, The Telltale Heart. And of course, this is a short story by Edgar Allan Poe, who is known for writing kind of scary Gothic fiction short stories. And they are kind of scary, and they've been made into movies from time to time. And of course, those tend to be horror movies.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why it was such a good book for elementary school. I think I read it in the 6th grade, and if it's a short story, it's not very long. You can finish it quickly. And a lot of really good stories out there are short stories. So I totally recommend them, especially for our listeners. If you like horror stories or suspenseful stories, this is one for you. You're not going to read about a lot of blood in books that were written, in the 1800s. But they will be suspenseful, that's for sure. So we're going to continue talking about some of the meanings in the telltale heart. What did you think happened? What was your guess? It's a great book to sit around and discuss and try to figure out what the author was really writing. And I'm sure he had someone in mind when he wrote this story, though.
Probably. It's probably based on real-life experiences or something like that. But let's get to it without any further delay. We'll read through the entire article for today, and then we'll come back to discuss it.
The Telltale Heart is one of the most famous horror short stories written by Edgar Allan Poe. Though brief, the story conveys the anonymous narrator's madness in plentiful detail and is ripe for literary analysis. It's a classic example of Gothic fiction, a genre that emerged in the late 18th century. Gothic fiction often portrays the darkness of the human soul, but does so with a creepy atmosphere, rich in terror and rising tension. One technique Poe uses to create this atmosphere is using a first-person perspective with an unreliable narrator. The speaker tells us nothing about themselves, except to proclaim they're not mad. Clearly, we shouldn't accept their words at face value. They say there was no motivation for their crime, and that they loved the old man. But is this true? The relationship between the two characters is ambiguous. Is the narrator the son or daughter of the old man? Was the murder carried out in revenge for strict or even abusive parenting, symbolized by the old man's watchful vulture eye? We don't know the answers, but Poe's narrative style encourages us to speculate. Another symbol to highlight in the story is the beating of the heart. It represents the narrator's feelings of guilt, especially in the final scene of the story. Before the murder, the sound could be seen as the narrator's conscience, warning them to stop. In the end, the beating increases in volume again, showing how the narrator is becoming more and more tormented by the knowledge of their crime. Ultimately, they confess to be free of the sound and their guilt. Let's dive in, folks. We're going to talk about this short story. It's very famous. It's probably Edgar Allan Poe's most famous piece of writing because it was it was creepy and fun at the same time. I also wanted to say something. I don't think we mentioned this in day one. A lot of Americans will pronounce these two words exactly the same, the telltale heart, because we're lazy. But if you want to be accurate, it's tell, tail, more of an A sound on the next word. But yeah, most people just say the telltale heart. But it is one of his most famous short stories, and it's very short, but it conveys or gives you this impression, the anonymous narrator's madness in plentiful detail is ripe for literary analysis. It is ripe for literary analysis, and that's what I was talking about. Just sitting around and kind of discussing what he meant by writing this and what his intention was. Anonymous means you don't know who's doing something or giving something. A lot of people will donate to charitable organizations anonymously because they don't want people to know they're giving away this money. Maybe they're afraid somebody will come and rob them because they're rich. I don't know. Or they're just humble. And they don't need to brag about giving money away. But if someone's anonymous, you don't know who it is. And the narrator of the story is anonymous. We don't know who it is. Tom mentioned in day one that the story is written in the first person. That means that the person telling the story will just be using I did this, I said this, I went there. That's the first person.
Exactly. And again, this person is anonymous. We don't know who this person is. Is this person related to the old man? Is it the old man's son or brother or even daughter or sister or whatever? Even the gender of the narrator is not clear, although I think most people probably assume it's a guy because they're the guys who are that go crazy and murder people.
Yeah,
and
most
stuff
of the
like
murders, especially at that time period, were mostly men. Women murdering was really rare.
Right. So, I'm going to assume it was a male, but for the spirit of the story, we should just realize that the narrator is anonymous. And if you talk about literary analysis, that means people look at the story or the novel or whatever, and they look for themes and ideas. And, of course, lots of courses in universities are all about analyzing literature. Yeah, what does the play Hamlet mean? Let's break it down. Let's look at the speeches of the various characters to see what it really means and what sort of implications it has for people in society. Literary, of course, means having to do with literature, things written like poetry and novels and short stories.
Right. Analysis is a noun, and the verb would be analyze. So analysis and analyze. We have the strong syllable on different syllables in those. Sorry about that. Analysis, second syllable. Analyze, first syllable. So, yeah, we'll often take very detailed looks at something. And there's usually discussion if you're taking a course in high school or college, especially in college when people are required to give their opinion a lot more than in high school.
And it's ripe for literary analysis, which means it's ready for that. It's begging to be analyzed by people.
For it, yeah.
And it's a classic example of Gothic fiction, a genre that emerged in the late 18th century. Gothic fiction, of course, is all about finding out what people are really thinking and the dark side of people and murder and all that kind of stuff. Gothic oftentimes refers to that period in history in Europe of the Goths and their architecture, but sometimes it also describes people who like a certain kind of music, like heavy metal, and they wear black clothes and they put on white and black makeup and stuff like that. Those are people who enjoy the Gothic genre of music. But this is Gothic fiction, and it's a genre that came out in the late 1700s. Gothic fiction often portrays the darkness of the human soul, but does so with a creepy atmosphere rich in terror and rising tension. Now, remember last time we talked about the word creep. Remember, he crept into the room.
Right.
He sneaked into the room or snuck into the room. And here we've got a form of it. To be creepy just means to be kind of scary. You might know somebody that you don't really understand very well, and they kind of keep to themselves and they do weird things. You might say, oh, that guy's really creepy. Maybe you should stay away from him.
I wanted to mention when Tom was talking about Gothic folks, they're actually called goth. Oh, he's a goth. She's a goth. Besides just the black hair, the black and white makeup, they'll often wear chains around their necks that kind of look like dog chains.
Yeah.
A lot of them are into vampire issues. It became popular back in the 1980s, and it's still going on. It's kind of a subculture. You still see goths around even today. But yeah, they have these morbid themes going on. Morbid just means relating to death and destruction. So, yeah. So, if you're creeping or somebody is creepy to you, ooh, he's kind of creepy. They kind of give you the willies. It just makes you kind of go, ooh. You don't feel safe around somebody who's creepy. You don't know what they're looking at, what they plan to do. Yeah, it's best to, if you are in a situation, especially girls out there, if you're in a situation and somebody's coming off as creepy, I would leave. Better safe than sorry. So this was the kind of Gothic fiction that was starting to emerge in the late 18th century. That's the last of the 1700s. And it often portrays the darkness of the human soul. Talks about people who actually confess that they have awful urges to hurt people, but does so with a really creepy, dark atmosphere. You're usually in dungeons, and there's no light, and it just gives you a kind of a scary feeling. It says the atmosphere is rich in terror and rising tension. A lot of people enjoy those kind of movies that make them sit on the edge of their seat and wait to scream. Terror is a noun, and it just describes this intense, really sharp feeling of fear. So if you're feeling terrified, it's because there's terror in the situation that you're currently in. Terrified, of course, is the adjective form of that.
Or you could be a terrorist by trying to scare people by blowing up bombs in markets and things like that. But in this case, it has a lot of things that scare you. It has a lot of terror.
Yeah.
And, of course, rising tension. As you continue to read the story, you just want to keep on reading and find out what happens next. It's very gripping. And here in the next paragraph, it says, one technique Poe uses to create this atmosphere is using a first-person perspective with an unreliable narrator. So, yes, we've already talked about this. Of course, different stories are told to us in different ways. If it's first person, of course, you see a lot of I did this, then I went there, then I did that. That's first person. And the perspective, of course, is their point of view. So basically, we're told things by the narrator from his or her point of view or his or her perspective.
Yeah, so the speaker tells us nothing about themselves except to proclaim they're not mad. And that's a kind of a proclamation or a statement that continues on through the story. You know, he seems to always want to assure you or to insist that he's not crazy, which just leads you to believe that he is indeed crazy. One person that's not crazy is our Chinese teacher. We're going to take a break here, listen, and then we'll be back.
Hello everyone, 我是派老师。今天讲解的是夏季合刊 Unit 15 Day 2的课程。第一天课程里面呢，我们了解到了故事的概要。不晓得大家读完故事以后，觉得故事的叙事者他的精神状态如何啊？其实文学除了故事情节以外，还有很多值得大家探究推敲的，包括到底有没有任何象征的意义。比方说凶手他听到的心跳声，他认为是老人的心跳。不过除了可能是幻听以外，有没有其他诠释的可能？同学也可以问问自己。这些都是这个单元第二天课程内容所要解说的。那我们可以呢更加深入认识这篇短篇故事的 Telltale Heart。那也可以进而了解 Alan Poe 这位美国文学家的写作风格。好，那我们一起来看看第二天课程的重点。在第一段里面呢，就说到这篇故事的作者是 Edgar Allan Poe。那第二句 though brief， 请同学特别注意，这是一个省略句though 的省略句。为什么可以省略呢？因为这个 though 副词子句里面的主词其实也是 the story， 虽然这则故事很短，那因为主词都相同，所以省略掉了。那这个叙事者呢，他其实是我们不知道他叫什么名字，所以才用 anonymous 这个字。那 narrator 或也有人念作 narrator。那这个叙事者呢，他其实应该精神有点问题所以我们才会说 madness。后面呢，其实就很详细的去描述他到底有什么样子的状况。那再来呢，我们看到这样子的短篇故事，这一篇其实是非常典型的 Gothic fiction， 就是哥德式的小说。它是一种文学的题材。那请同学把逗点后面的这个 genre 画起来。我们在讲文学题材的时候呢，我们的用词呢是 genre 这个字。好，那到底哥德式小说在描述什么呢？ Gothic fiction often portrays， 这个 portrays 其实是描述的意思，它描述的是人性的黑暗面。好，那同时呢，常常都会创造出一种非常诡异 比较可怕的氛围 ，a creepy atmosphere。好，再来呢，请同学我们看到 paragraph 2第2段这里，那第一句就先告诉我们这篇短篇故事Alan Poe 写的非常的有趣的是，他是从第一人称出发，第一人称叙事的方式，英文怎么说 ？A first person perspective。好，那再来，因为我们不知道，我们看到第2句这里所讲的 ，The speaker tells us nothing about themselves。同学有没有觉得很奇怪啊 ？The speaker 是单数的，那后面为什么是 about themselves？其实这是我们现代英文常看到的，尤其是最近常常有这样子的状况。那因为英文里面的代名词 he、she， 或者呢，当我们用受格的时候 him、her， 其实是有明显的性别的区别。那这几年来，尤其是在美国，他们性别平等的意识呢高涨，那所以他们就会觉得说，除了男性、女性之外呢，还有各式各样的性别的可能啊，所以现在呢，常常会用这种 they 来避免掉这种2元的分法，请同学可以注意到。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
All right, let's continue with our lesson. Again, we're doing some literary analysis of The Telltale Heart. Again, Edgar Allan Poe uses the technique of the first-person perspective, but the narrator is unreliable. We can't really trust this person. And, of course, the speaker doesn't really tell us much about him or herself, and they just do say, however, that they're not crazy, that they're not mad, okay? And clearly, we shouldn't accept their words at face value. We shouldn't accept this on the surface. Just because they told us does not mean that they aren't crazy. In fact, we're probably convinced already that they are crazy.
Yeah. I wanted to mention, besides the first-person perspective in writing, we have the second person, which is rarely seen, but sometimes you see books that are all written with the you. That's really kind of an odd type of writing, but you'll see it occasionally. The most prevalent perspective that is used is the third person. Right. He did this, she did that. I kind of like when you get first person. You know, that's kind of fun sometimes. Well, there's a lot of stuff. It's rich in this atmosphere. There's a lot to kind of scare the reader with. And as we know, the speaker doesn't really tell anything about himself, doesn't tell us at least. And clearly it says we shouldn't accept their word at face value. This is a phrase we'll often use. It's kind of hard to even know what it means if you just see two words like face value. What is that? Well, if someone accepts something at face value, it means they're believing whatever you're telling them. They don't need further proof or evidence. I have friends that are so honest. I accept anything they say at face value. I don't question them. I don't check their sources because they've proven in the past to be very trustworthy. You shouldn't accept everything at face value, especially if it's really important to your health and life. Double check sources, double check evidence. But that's what face value means.
Right. We should, we shouldn't believe them. We shouldn't accept their word at face value. We shouldn't take their word for it. We could also say that. I did want to mention also that we are using the pronoun they to stand for he and she. That's been a movement recently in society to use the word they in place of he and she or her and him so that there's no ambiguity about gender. So, yeah, they say there was no motivation for their crime and that they loved the old man, but is this true? So again, the narrator says, hey, I had no motivation for the crime. There was no motive, but I loved him anyway. But is this really true? Of course, the story kind of makes us doubt the narrator's word for this.
Yeah, so the relationship between the two characters, it says here, is ambiguous. If something's ambiguous, it's not clear what's going on. Maybe somebody tells you something and you say, yeah, that's kind of ambiguous. What are you trying to say? So if it's ambiguous, it's open to different ways of interpreting. Different interpretations could be, decided at that point, or it's just not clear. It's lacking clarity. It's not very definite. It's ambiguous. So maybe you have a friend and you invite them to a party and they say, yeah, that sounds really fun. Yeah, let me see if I can make it. That answer is ambiguous. Are they coming or not? You don't know. They might not. So, yeah, if someone's ambiguous, you might have an ambiguous future. You don't know what's coming, and it's hard to make plans.
Especially in this day and age. And a similar word to ambiguous is vague. I asked him for some specific information, but he was vague. He didn't really tell me very much. And so, yes, indeed, the relationship between these two characters is ambiguous. We don't really know what their relationship is. Is it father-son, father-daughter, etc., etc.? And is the narrator the son or daughter of the old man? Again, we don't really know the gender of the narrator. And was the murder carried out in revenge for strict or even abusive parenting, symbolized by the old man's watchful vulture eye? That's a good question. We do have the evil eye, the vulture eye from the old man. So the narrator could be the child of this old man who had an unhappy childhood because the old man was very cruel to the narrator, beat the narrator up, or punished him or her severely. So that's what it could mean. That's what the vulture eye could symbolize.
Yeah, in some cultures, they actually believe in that evil eye, and they come up with other symbols to kind of counteract or protect themselves from what they consider to be the evil eye. I know I was just looking at jewelry online the other day, and Italy has something that they've come up with. It's kind of a cornucopia kind of, shape, but it's supposed to protect you against the evil eye. And I thought,
really?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, there are older cultures that believe in the evil eye, that someone can kind of put a curse on you in some way. I think that this person has probably grown up with this old man, and when he gets that certain look in his eye, maybe that's when he's been beaten or abused in some way, and so he's learned to be fearful of it. You know when your mom and dad are angry and you know when to stay away. So maybe that's been his experience, and he's just always felt like he needed to protect himself when he thought he saw this vulture eye come out and maybe want to cause him some harm. We don't know.
Right. There may have been some abusive parenting.
Yeah.
Abusive just means somebody is treating you in a violent or cruel way.
Yeah.
Like maybe you know somebody who was in an abusive relationship and they left the relationship because there was too much violence or beating going on. And that could be what's happening here. And we've got the watchful vulture eye. Of course, if something's watchful, it's always looking at you, and maybe you're kind of scared of it. Well, we don't know the answers to these questions, but Poe's narrative style encourages us to speculate. Narrative just means how a story is told and what details are given and what details are not given. So he's got this narrative, and, well, that makes us stop to think, what does he really mean there? What is going on in this story? Because the writer is just not telling us.
Yeah, it's hard to know. But it says here that the narrative style encourages us to speculate. If you speculate about something, you don't know what the truth is, and so you just kind of throw out ideas or guesses about what's going on. Some people will buy stock in the stock market because they want to speculate. They're not sure if the stock's going to rise or fall, but they're willing to risk their money and they'll speculate. There's a lot of speculation that goes on in the market. So moving on to the next paragraph, another symbol to highlight in the story is the beating of the heart. Beating here just means that pounding sound that he hears. Someone will say, oh, my heart's pounding when they're nervous or scared. Or my heart's beating really fast. They'll say that too, but we'll often talk about our heart pounding. It represents the narrator's feelings of guilt. If you are feeling guilty or you have feelings of guilt, you know that you've done something wrong and that you probably need to go and fix what you've done wrong. If you killed someone, it's hard to fix that unless you go to prison. So I think this guy's feeling guilty because he knows that he's responsible for the death of the old man.
Yeah, guilt is the noun, guilty is the adjective. Maybe you did something as a parent that accidentally harmed your child, so of course you're going to feel very guilty about that. And yes, indeed, the heartbeat represents the feelings of guilt that the narrator has, especially in the final scene of the story where he or she goes crazy because they hear this heart beating louder and louder and they finally break down and they confess to the crime. And before the murder, the sound could be seen as the narrator's conscience warning them to stop, or warning this person to stop. And yes, indeed, that's how you could see the heartbeat there. It could be the conscience of the narrator, and it's not really the heartbeat of the old man.
Yeah, your conscience is the part of your mind and heart, I think, that tell you whether what you're doing is right or wrong. And everyone has a conscience. Sometimes people who continue to do evil things or hurt people, their conscience kind of dims. It's not so strong. But everyone has that inner part of them that tells them whether what they're doing is right or wrong. If you have a guilty conscience, it just means you feel guilty about something that you did that was wrong. And the opposite of that, you often will hear us say, I have a clear conscience, which means I feel good about what I did. My actions were pure. I don't feel guilty. I think what I did was right.
And in the end, the beating increases in volume again. It gets louder. And this is showing us how the narrator is becoming more and more tormented by the knowledge of their crime. To torment somebody just means to torture them or to make them feel very scared or very uncomfortable. So again, he's tormented, he's scared, he's terrorized by the knowledge of that crime. And ultimately, in the end, this person confesses in order to be free of the sound and to be free of their guilt. And yes, indeed, this does happen sometimes if you're trying to keep a secret and you're just getting too nervous. You finally say, okay, I confess, I did it. Now I can feel relieved.
It's always good to confess and to, make amends, do the right thing then. Well, that's it, guys. We're going to listen one more time to our Chinese teacher, and then we'll be back to say goodbye.
再来呢，我们接着看第三句。第三句这里有个片语叫 at face value。那这些人他们抱歉，应该说这个叙事者，因为我们不知道他的性别到底是男是女，所以第三句持续的是用 their 来代替哦，就是因为不清楚这个人到底可不可信嘛，所以他所说的话呢，也没办法呢，就直接的相信 at face value， 那意思就是如同他字面上所说的来去接受，很难，没有办法直接去相信。那接着往下呢，那这个叙事者他就说他没有犯案的动机 ，no motivation for their crime。好的，那再来呢，请同学看到，其实整篇故事作者并没有交代这个杀人凶手还有受害者之间到底是什么关系，所以第五句说到 The relationship between the two characters is ambiguous， 就是其实没有清楚的定义。那我们也不知道这个杀人他到底是为什么这样子做的，是在报复还是呢是什么样子的情况。我们看到第六句这里Is the narrator the son or daughter of the old man？ 持续的呢，针对他们的关系来做讨论。那再来，到底这件事情是出于什么样子的动机 ？Carried out in revenge 是要复仇，复什么仇啊 ？For strict or even abusive parenting？ 那这就是假设呢，这个受害者跟这个杀人凶手好像呢，他们是亲子关系了。那后面我们才会说，这个作者他就讲到，好像呢，这个眼睛所代表的是一种象征的意义。它所象征呢，其实就是父母亲呢用不好的方式 近乎虐待的方式对自己的小孩。好，那我们再看到第3段，其实进一步的去解释，其实还有另外一个象征的意义，就是 the beating of the heart。那文章的作者告诉我们说，这里的象征意义呢，其实应该是什么？并不是老人真实的心跳，因为他已经被杀了。这个 narrator 他所听到的呢，应该是自己内心当中的罪恶感。没有办法接受良心的谴责，所以他听到了这个心跳声。It represents the narrator's feelings of guilt。好，那以上呢，就是我们针对课程内容第2天所做的中文讲解。谢谢大家。
That's it for today, everybody. We hope you enjoyed this issue's unit on literature, and we hope you look forward to the next time we talk about a work of literature. I know I'm looking forward to it, and Stephanie probably is as well.
Yeah.
That brings us to the end of our lesson again. Thanks for joining us. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.